Two of my best friends one's from Houston, another New Jersey, North Dakota. Everybody's from
Good evening, everyone. To all of you who are here on time and present, we shall not wait for anyone else. I'm Bob Jolly. I'm the director here at the Athenaeum. I'm just going to talk for a minute. I'm going to get out of the way. Thanks for coming to this forum for Attorney General candidates. In a minute, I'm going to turn the podium over to Sonia Schuyler, who is going to introduce the program and get us going. Just a couple of things quick. Thanks to KATV for simulcasting this, because this is bringing it to all of the people who are home, and that's a great opportunity. If you're not here live, if you're not watching at home, you're not making an effort, and that's your problem. Don't talk about it later. The bathrooms are in the basement. For those of you who don't know this building, take the elevator right there, basement level. There aren't stairs. Two to come back up here. There are masks there. This is not political. If you want a mask, there's a pile of masks right back there. This is an excellent time to turn off your cell phone. And I use mine for a clock, but watch me go. Something, 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 something. I'll figure this out. That's all I have to say. Please welcome Sonia Schuyler, who is a board member of the League of Women Voters of Vermont. Here is Sonia.
Hello and welcome from the League of Women Voters to this 2022 Attorney General Candidates Forum. We are not set for short people. We have co-sponsors, the Athenaeum. Thanks very much for the gracious co-sponsoring and hosting of the events. Also the Vermont Commission on Women, the ACLU of Vermont, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom Burlington chapter. I'm a member of the board of directors of the League of Women Voters and head of the elections committee. The League is strictly nonpartisan. We never endorse candidates and we never oppose candidates. Our purpose in hosting the candidates forum is for you, the voter, to meet your candidates, to hear what they have to say on the issues and to ask questions. We have two candidates running for Secretary of State. Excuse me, Attorney General. wrong forum. This is the last one. Sorry, a little frazzled. The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer in the state, providing legal counsel in all matters in which the state is a party or has an interest. The Attorney General's office enforces criminal, environmental, consumer protection, civil rights, and other laws to keep cities, towns, and homes safe. Now I'd like to call on Carrie Brown, who is Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women, who will be the moderator for this forum, and she's also on Montpelier City Council. So, welcome, Carrie.
Good evening, everyone. Your Justice, can you hear me all right? All right, great. It's great to see you. I was in another one of these forums last week, and I was in the audience, and so it's really great to have this view of this amazing room. This building is unbelievable. Thank you so much to the Athenaeum for hosting, and thank you to the League of Women Voters and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom in the Burlington chapter. And thank you to the candidates who are here. I'm looking forward to this discussion. All right, so the way things are going to go, actually first I'll introduce the candidates to you. So first we have Charity Clark from Williston, and we have Michael Taglavia from Corinth. And I will let them tell you more about themselves. I won't take any time talking about them. So our format for tonight is each candidate will have 2 minutes to give an opening statement, and then we will have questions that we will ask, and they'll each get a chance to answer, and they'll each have 2 minutes. We have a timer up front who's keeping track of the time, so you all can look here and see your warning signs for when you're running out of time and when it's time to stop. And then we will have questions from the audience. We've also got some questions that have been sent to us ahead of time from the public. And then the candidates will have an opportunity for closing statements. All right, are you ready? Okay, so we drew lots before this started to see who would go first. And Ms. Clark is our first one up, so go ahead.
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Carrie and everyone, for being here tonight. Thank you to the sponsors and the Athenaeum. It's really wonderful to be here. My story begins in southern Vermont, where I grew up working in my family's grocery store. I stocked shelves, I ran the cash register, and I saw all kinds of people come through my line at the checkout. I saw people thriving, people on their way to work, and I saw people struggling. And I took those experiences with me when I grew up and I became a lawyer, but especially these last 8 years working at the Attorney General's office. I was a member of the leadership team as chief of staff, and I was a part of decision-making on all the major issues that came to the Attorney General's office, whether it be in the environmental division, consumer, criminal. And in my leadership, I always kept in mind that everyday Vermonter. I have been licensed to practice law in Vermont since 2005. I do believe it is important for our Attorney General to be an attorney. I have the background and the experience that this Attorney General needs. We need an Attorney General who has the scope and breadth of the office in mind, who has the legal expertise and the leadership experience to meet this moment in history, and who knows how to leverage the office for the best results for Vermont and for Vermonters. I am an attorney, I'm a Vermonter, I'm a mother. I will be ready to lead on day one.
Thank you. Mr. Taglia.
First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters and the Athenaeum and the other co-sponsors for having me. Thanks to Charity for being here. My name is Michael Taglia, and I want to be your next Attorney General. At a very young age, I was taught right from wrong. As a child, good ethics, morals, integrity, and accountability were all instilled in me. I carry those values with me today. I like to do what I can to try to help preserve Vermont's tranquility, beauty, and small-town living. Along my journey, I was fortunate enough to own 2 successful businesses. I understand firsthand humble beginnings and the hard-working middle class. I know what it takes to focus a team toward a common goal and succeed. I'm proud to say that I'm not a career politician, just a man trying to do good things for Vermonters. I'm not an attorney. I believe that gives me an advantage. I can bring a new perspective to the table. My journey here into politics began with my introduction to Samantha LaFave, who's my legislator in Montpelier. She expressed a need for help. I agreed to help her in any way I could. I began attending county Republican meetings and then state Republican meetings, and it culminated in an August 21st afternoon meeting where I was drafted, nominated, and accepted the nomination to be the Attorney General candidate for the Republican Party. And here we are today. Again, my name is Mike Taglia, and I'd like to be your next Attorney General.
Thank you very much. We're going to alternate the order now. So this next question goes first to you, Mr. Taglia. So this comes from the League of Women Voters. As Attorney General, what are your legislative priorities?
My legislative priorities are public safety, public safety, public safety. People no longer feel as safe as they once did. I want to try to change that, and one of the main things I want to try to do is take the $100+ million big pharma lawsuits settlements that are coming because of the opioid crisis and apply them to law enforcement and drug abatement programs. Drug interdiction efforts also would be part of the effort. Stopping drug traffickers and keeping the drugs off the street would be a great way to start. We need to also stop the revolving door of our bail system. We need to have it made very clear to would-be criminals that they will be held accountable for their actions. I oppose any reduction to qualified immunity, and I will heavily lobby the legislature against removing or modifying qualified immunity. Our police need qualified immunity. They also need to be fully funded, well-trained, and well-equipped to do their job and do it safely. Also, I would push for more education through the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Against Drugs, in our schools. It's a low-cost, high-impact program that will help keep our kids away from addictive drugs. Working to prevent child pornography and sex trafficking is also going to be one of my main pushes. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
One of the important roles that the Attorney General plays is supporting the legislature in their work. It is something I'm very familiar with because as Chief of Staff for 4 years, I supervised the efforts of the Attorney General to support the legislature. I was in the State House a lot and just supporting the work that we do there. I do have priorities in mind for January. The first would be to ensure that Vermont is a safe harbor for those who are seeking an abortion and for providers here in Vermont who provide abortions. I also believe strongly that we need to be living our values when it comes to global warming, make sure we're protecting our environment. That means ensuring that we are meeting the targets set forth in the Global Warming Solutions Act in terms of greenhouse gas and emissions. And the legislature has work to do in that regard. I want to be the Attorney General who can support them doing that work and making sure that policies and laws are passed to make sure we meet those targets. We also need to expand the sealing and expungement law, which allows people with old criminal records to put the past behind them and have those records sealed so they can get better jobs. We also, in my view, need to look at data privacy. This is an issue that I have worked very closely on for the past 4 years. I co-authored a detailed memo in January that outlined a comprehensive data privacy bill that would, again, have us living our values here in Vermont of respecting privacy, but especially for children. Finally, we have in Vermont 40,000 victims of domestic and sexual violence every year, 40,000. I don't think we do enough in that area. The Attorney General's office has housed within it a commission of stakeholders that is directed by the legislature. And every year they look at the fatalities related to domestic violence. They produce recommendations related to their review, and I will zealously advocate for implementation of their recommendations. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. All right, our next question will start with you. All right, so please summarize and prioritize the duties of the Attorney General.
Well, the Attorney General, in shorthand, is the lawyer to the state, and they have 150 people working there. 90 of them are attorneys. There's 7 divisions, and it's a wide variety of divisions. There's the General Counsel and Administrative Law Division that provides basic attorney services to client agencies like the Department of Taxes and that kind of thing. There's the Environmental Division, the Civil Division, which represents the lawsuits when we're sued, the Human Services Division, the Public Protection Division, the Criminal Division, and the Appellate Division that handles the appeals to the Supreme Court. We bring lawsuits when a crime is committed. We bring lawsuits in civil court when violations of environmental or consumer law have been violated. And we support the legislature, as I mentioned earlier, and just provide some of that day-to-day advice that is needed. Reviewing contracts is not really exciting, but that's part of what we do.
Thank you. Mr. Tagliavia.
The Attorney General is the chief law enforcement officer for the state. As I said before, I'm not an attorney, but as your Attorney General, I will be the administrator and the team leader and helping decide where the priorities will be as far as what cases will be brought and how many people should be assigned to certain divisions. Cherry has me at a little bit of an advantage because she's been there before, but I can tell you that I am a quick study, and that with the right team, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who are on the team there who will be very helpful, I will be able to keep the state on an even keel and help right some of the problems that are a big issue, like I said, with law enforcement issues in the state today. The criminal division will be one of the divisions that I want to make sure is made stronger, bolstered, and maybe even larger. And I would do that first by making the other divisions more efficient, find out where we can be made more efficient, and moving people to the criminal division where necessary, before trying to go and increase the budget. But the criminal division, for me, would be the primary division to be looking at.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from the ACLU, another one of the sponsors from tonight. And we'll start with you, Mr. Tagliavia. Qualified immunity is a court-made doctrine that prevents liability for government officials and employees when they violate someone's constitutional rights, unless it was clear, usually based on a prior court case, that those rights were well established. This means a court can agree, yes harm, no foul. Is it fair that individuals who are physically and emotionally harmed by the violation of their rights at the hands of police, for instance, receive no compensation due to qualified immunity because a similar case did not previously happen before? Whether you support or oppose maintaining qualified immunity, how would you address this imbalance?
I would want to look at individual cases. The reason I am against even looking at the qualified immunity right now in our place in history right now is we need to be sure that we're sending a message to our law enforcement in this state, whether they be sheriffs, town police, or Vermont State Police, that we have their back, that they will get funding and they will get the training that they need. All police officers and law enforcement in this state are subject to a code of ethics, the criminal law, as well as civil law. So I would want to be able to look at the specifics of a case before I made an assessment. But there would still be ways, or still are ways, to hold an officer, a law enforcement officer, accountable if he was to be found in a violation. I think the message to the community needs to be that we want our law enforcement to stick around, we want them to be well-trained, and that we have their back. I know law enforcement are just flesh and blood men and women, just like the rest of us in this room. And I'm not saying they won't make mistakes, and where egregious mistakes are made, they need to be held accountable. But I will not make a judgment against someone without seeing all the facts of the case first.
All right, thank you. Ms. Clark.
All of us deserve to be safe and to feel safe. I believe, we are at a reckoning point in this country when it comes to policing. I think that's a good thing to see what can we be doing better. We are very fortunate to have folks who are willing to go into policing. I agree there is a massive shortage right now, as in many industries. It's a problem. We need to be thinking about recruiting and retention. But when it comes to qualified immunity, I really do believe in police accountability and that there should be regress for someone who is harmed. The legislature has currently instructed their legislative counsel, who's their lawyer at the State House, to do legal research and write a memo that looks at qualified immunity around the country so that the legislature can determine what qualified immunity should look like here in Vermont. I am looking forward to being a part of that conversation as your Attorney General. I think it's very important. I'm looking forward to reading that memo. I understand it's not finished yet, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Thank you. Our next question comes from the Vermont Commission on Women. And the question is, would you take any action to protect individuals who travel to Vermont to seek abortion care, or to protect Vermont-based abortion providers who care for out-of-state patients here in Vermont or through telemedicine? And Ms. Clark, you're first.
No, never. I believe it is a human right to control your own body, to make decisions about your own health care, and to access an abortion.
Do you want to talk about how you might protect them, if that's appropriate?
Yes, thank you for the second part of the question. This summer, I put forth my own safe harbor plan, which, if you're really curious, is on my website, to make Vermont a safe harbor in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which stripped from us our right to an abortion that occurred more years ago than I've been alive. And I personally was outraged and devastated, as I think many Vermonters were, to learn that our right had been stripped, and moved quickly to put a plan in place to propose a plan that hopefully we put in place by the legislature and others to do everything that we can to make sure that we are preserving our rights and we're protecting people who need an abortion or who perform abortions. We also have tools at our disposal that maybe aren't as obvious. I'm going to give one example. Our Consumer Protection Act is very nimble and can do many things. One of the challenges that folks who are seeking an abortion may have is misinformation on the web about abortion access. And I, as Attorney General, will use the Consumer Protection Act to ensure there is no deception in the marketplace and to have a no tolerance policy for pregnancy centers who deceive anyone.
Thank you. Mr. Taglia.
Could you just read me the question again?
Certainly. Would you take any action to protect individuals who travel to Vermont to seek abortion care, or to protect Vermont-based abortion providers who care for out-of-state patients here in Vermont or through telemedicine?
I wouldn't go and seek to penalize someone traveling to the state for any reason. It's disappointing to me that we would try to market ourselves as a state to come to for abortion services. I am pro-life, but I do not believe that someone coming to the state of Vermont needs to be punished. Another thing I'd like to address is the Roe decision. What it did was it affirmed states' rights. It affirmed federalism. It did not remove anyone's right in this state to an abortion. No one in this state, the day after that decision came down, was forbidden from getting an abortion in this state. Now, that's not to say that I support that. I'm just stating the way the law is. As the Attorney General, I would be bound by the law. I would not be the king and decide unilaterally how to apply law. But I don't think that the idea of taking punitive action against someone is a good idea. But I also don't think, like I said before, having Vermont labeled as a state to come for abortion access, I don't think that's a good commercial for the state. And we're, as Charity brought up, some things that are coming up in the legislature. There will be a push to legalize prostitution, and I will lobby the legislature heavily against that. If we want to stop the drug problem in this state, legalizing prostitution will not help us stopping the drug issue.
All right, thank you. Our next question comes from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. To what extent, as the Attorney General, will you pursue litigation against violators of specific state laws, be it environmental, commercial, or law enforcement, etc.? We are particularly interested in environmental violations, given the EPA's new health advisories on PFAS, PFAS, which I cannot tell you, I'm not going to try to say what the whole thing is. It's an abbreviation for a chemical, and classification of 2 forms of PFAS as hazardous substances.
Is that for me first?
That is for you, yes.
With respect to the PFAS, I don't know a lot about it. Apparently those chemicals are in a lot of our everyday use products. And my first question was, what are we doing? I think a lot of our products that we store food in no longer have those chemicals in them, but they're still prevalent. I would not support completely shutting down the use of those chemicals for risk of the law of unintended consequences, where we go and create another problem. But if we know of the problems with them, we need to be pushing toward eliminating the use of them. With respect to environmental law, and I guess you're talking about possibly the green initiatives, I worry a lot about the laws and the commission. Like there's a commission, I forgot what the name of the commission is, but what I believe the push is in this state is going to so adversely affect the economy of this state that the people on the lower financial end of the spectrum are going to be the ones hurt first and hurt the most. And the last thing we want to do is go hit another blow to the financial economy of this state by enforcing environmental laws before we have other options like eliminating fossil fuels and cars and trucks that burn fossil fuels.
Thank you. Charity.
I believe that we all deserve clean, safe drinking water, and PFAS contamination we know has been a problem, especially in southern Vermont, in Bennington County, where I grew up. And it's unacceptable. As Attorney General, I will take that responsibility very seriously and pursue actions against chemical companies and others who are polluters. I believe very strongly that one of the values we have here in Vermont is loving our beautiful natural environment, which we all enjoy together, walking, hiking, skiing, hunting. And I take that responsibility of the Attorney General very seriously. Our environmental division at the AG's office works closely with the Agency of Natural Resource and brings actions independently as well. It's something that will be a priority for me as a personal value that I have.
Thank you. All right, we have another question from the League of Women Voters. How do you see your role in creating bipartisan dialogue and policy development in this extremely partisan and volatile political climate?
That's a great question. As I mentioned, I grew up in southern Vermont, and you always, if you live in a tiny town with no stoplight on a dirt road next to a farm, you always get along with everyone, because if you didn't, it would just be you and the squirrels, and you wouldn't have any friends. So I've had a long life of getting along with everyone, and I think it's really important. We all have experienced this, at town meeting, at the local store, where we might not always agree with the person we see, our neighbor, but we try really hard to find the common ground and be friendly and cordial. It's a part of my ethos personally. When I work in the State House, I always try to be friendly with the friends across the aisle, and would continue that ethos as Attorney General.
Thank you. Mr. Tenvia?
The short answer is difficult. I can recall a conversation I had with a gentleman at the Tunbridge Fair a couple of weeks ago. He and I were from opposite ends of the spectrum, but we had a 45-minute long discussion, and in the end we did find common ground. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but if we have the best interest of this state in mind, and we keep that in the forefront of our thoughts, then it should be made a little bit easier.
All right, our next question comes again from the ACLU of Vermont. Police traffic stops across Vermont have shown persistent racial disparities in stops and searches of black drivers, while those drivers are less likely than white drivers to be found with contraband. We also see significant racial disparities in who is imprisoned for drug crime, among other things. How will you use the Attorney General's office to address the racial disparities in the criminal legal system? Mr. D'Agostino.
I'd like to start off by saying, and I believe it's a biblical quote, "I'm not my brother's keeper." I would like to see more of the specifics about the disparities in vehicle stops. But I can say, use an example. If you were to stop a vehicle at night for a specific reason, I don't know too many police officers who can actually see into the vehicle well enough to see who the occupant is. In those type instances, I don't know that it could be classified as racially motivated stop. Like I said, I would like to see more of some of the specifics. But I know that if you were to walk into a prison and ask if there was anybody who was guilty, they would all say they were innocent. Law enforcement in the field is just one part of the criminal justice system. They present with a case with evidence, and the Attorney General and the attorneys who will be trying a case will have to evaluate the evidence to see if it should go to trial, and if it does go to trial, what the possibilities of a conviction would be. So I think we need to still look at each individual case and not look at statistics and what the statistics supposedly show us. If I was to commit a crime, then I would be the one who needed to be held responsible. And Lady Justice is blind, so everybody, including the police and the Attorney General's office, should act that way too.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
I believe this is a problem that affects all of us, and all of us need to be a part of the solution, because racial disparities have no place in Vermont, and we all need to care and be a part of the solution. We are really lucky here in Vermont. We had, like a few years ago, I think a grant, and this outside organization that's a nonprofit used data to advise the legislature and stakeholders in a working group kind of process for changes that could be made to our criminal justice system. And the latter portion of that, it was called Justice Reinvestment, focused on racial disparities. That report came out in the spring, and some of the recommendations are already being implemented, I believe. One of them was to have judges and others make sure that they were doing implicit bias training, and another was to create sentencing guidelines for judges. I support that work. I was involved in that process, and internally in the Attorney General's office, one of the recommendations involved our office and immediately phone the person responsible. It was data collection by our community justice unit, and they started doing a better job of collecting data. I really love that kind of collaboration. I think it's a great way to make progress, is to use data to push the needle on problems like this. So yeah, I would continue to take that approach and implement those policies.
Thank you. You all are doing so well at staying within the time limits. It's very impressive. All right, this next question comes from the Vermont Commission on Women. Vermont has experienced some high-profile cases of women murdered by their partners or ex-partners in the past few years, which shines a spotlight on a perennial issue here in Vermont. What measures will you take to reduce domestic violence and violence against women?
This is one of the marquee issues of my campaign. If you go to my website, you will see this is one of the top issues of my campaign. Domestic violence, in my view, does not get enough attention from all of us. I will be the first woman elected Attorney General of Vermont. As we know, domestic violence is a very gendered issue, and I will take it incredibly seriously. Before I mentioned the commission that's housed within the Attorney General's office called the Domestic Violence Fatality Review Commission, and they give recommendations every year. And I will make sure that those recommendations are implemented. And I want to, since I have time, and I already mentioned this commission in the report, I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the examples is, and progress every year is made, but we got to do better. One example is that when an abuser has a relief from abuse order against them, a judge has the authority to take their firearms away, but thought wasn't given previously enough to the idea that this person might be staying in a home where there's firearms that belong to someone else, and that is actually a danger. So that was one of the recommendations of the group of stakeholders in this commission. And there's more involved. They're not all legislative related. I plan on participating meaningfully in their work. And I also plan to continue what I've been doing on the campaign trail, which is going around the state and meeting with organizations that serve domestic violence survivors, that house domestic violence survivors in shelters, and advocate for changes and improvements to help the issue of domestic violence. Before my time is up, I want to note that half of homicides every year relate to domestic violence. So if you care about public safety, you have to focus on domestic violence because it's literally half of the homicides in Vermont.
Thank you. Mr. Tagliavia.
I don't know a lot about the statistics, but we've all seen or heard about how we know somebody or know somebody who knows somebody who's a victim of domestic violence, or, like Charity said, they wind up a victim of homicide because of it. The criminal justice system is probably best to use data to be able to analyze how they can isolate who could possibly be the most violent. Domestic issues, any police officer in the field will tell you, is one of the most sensitive calls they could make. A police officer could go to a home where there's a domestic abuse call and make a decision to arrest one or both of the parties, and if one of the parties he's decided to arrest, the party that makes the call could wind up attacking a police officer because they just want the person to be sent out of the home, not arrested. It's a really tough issue, and it's not a one-size-fits-all. That's why the criminal justice system, including the judges who would put a protective order in place, don't always have the answers. Every situation is different, and I'm not saying that this should not be addressed. It's just a very difficult situation, and I think some of the mental health community should be involved in some of the assessments to try to keep people safer when it comes to domestic abuse.
Thank you. We'll have one more question from our sponsors, and then we'll go to audience questions. You've sent quite a few up here to me, so. All right, this question comes from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Will you take steps to protect documented and undocumented immigrants in Vermont from harmful or unlawful immigration enforcement practices? If so, how? If not, why? Mr. Tagliavia.
I would like to know what someone describes as an unlawful practice. If you're talking about abuses of illegals like low wages or something like that, that would be something that needs to be addressed. But in this day and age, Vermont, like all of the other states, our border states. And I think that one of the ways we handle the abuses that may or may not have occurred is to enforce our immigration laws. I don't know that our immigration system is broken, rather the people implementing the system are broken. I believe that if we have a secure border, that there will be less of the crimes that you brought up in your question. I believe the best way we handle that is to have a secure border and not having any illegals in the country, or if we find them, that we do take measures to deport them.
Thank you, Ms. Black.
I consider myself to be a humanist. I believe in people. I believe in people who are undocumented, and I think it's really important that we acknowledge that we had, a difficult 4 years under the Trump administration, where a lot of the policies that were put forth by that administration were not, didn't come from values that we share here in Vermont. The Attorney General plays a really important role on the national stage, joining other states who are like-minded with taking action, with joining lawsuits, with filing amicus briefs, which are friend of the court briefs, and comment letters in various cases. When it comes to immigration issues, our Attorney General, while I was Chief of Staff, joined lawsuits and other actions that other states had to try to prevent some of the harm that occurred under the Trump administration. Should that level of harm or any harm to people who are undocumented in Vermont occur again, I will absolutely join forces with other like-minded states and attorneys general to make sure that our values are being reflected and our voice is being heard.
Thank you. All right, we will start with a question that came in by email ahead of time. Will you support a comprehensive revision to the 1987 State of Vermont policy on solid waste disposal and related treatment of landfill leachate?
I think that, what year did you say that was?
1987. There's no context given here, so this sounds like a quiz question. It's not meant to be a quiz. If you don't know what that law is, that's okay.
Well, if it has to do with leachate, which means some sort of pollution from a landfill, since we have better scientific practices now than we did back then, it would probably be a good idea to revisit the statute. We have better ways of measuring pollutants, whether it be in groundwater, air pollution, and such. It's always a good idea to revisit laws for a lot of reasons. In the tech age, in the internet age, we have other laws that don't even take into consideration the internet and stuff like that. So it would be a good idea to revisit a law that would be that old. If we're looking to prevent pollution from landfills and stuff like that, if we have the technology, we should do it.
Thank you.
For me, I don't feel like I know with specificity and context enough about that to really answer it. I want to express a value that I have, which I shared earlier, of wanting to protect Vermont's environment. But there's a lot of considerations that go into an issue like that, and I'm reluctant, without researching it, to state an opinion.
Thank you. All right, this next question is a two-part question, so it's really like two questions in one. Okay, so sharpen your brains. If the legislature considered decriminalization of drug possession, what would be your position? And then also, what is your view on safe injection sites? And this person writes, assume in both cases that these changes would include increased treatment. So, decriminalization of drug possession and safe injection sites.
And this is me.
Yes.
I So here's the thing with decriminalization. I don't view it as just decriminalization. I think we should call it treatment and decriminalization whenever it's mentioned, because I think that's the thought behind it. My initial view on this is that we've had a war on drugs for 50 years, and for 50 years it has failed. We need to be moving from a punitive model to a treatment model. Treatment and decriminalization obviously takes that into consideration, but let's talk about the treatment. It's not just drug addiction treatment, it's mental health counseling, it's job counseling, and all of those wraparound services need to be in place, in my view, for a treatment and decriminalization model to succeed. So that's my answer to the first question. The second question is about safe injection sites or harm reduction sites. I believe that there's not one person in Vermont who hasn't been untouched by the opioid crisis. All of us know someone, have a neighbor, a loved one who has suffered from opioid use disorder. I personally have gone around the state in my campaign, and I've met with mothers and fathers and others who have lost children and loved ones to the opioid crisis. To do nothing is unacceptable. As for specifically the concept of a harm reduction site, if there were agreement from the federal prosecutors that they weren't going to prosecute, and there was a excuse me, a local community partner who was willing to host, and there were those wraparound services, and a community wanted to do that, I would absolutely support that.
Thank you. Mr. Taglia.
Could you just repeat it one more time?
Sure.
The first part.
Yeah, if the legislature considered decriminalization of drug possession, what would be your position? And then what's your view on safe injection sites?
My view is I would lobby hard against decriminalization. Like I brought up earlier, we have an opioid crisis. We're going to be getting $100+ million over 10 years from Big Pharma because of the opioid crisis. By decriminalizing it, I just think we're going to be making the problem worse. I don't think that's a good idea. I just don't, and I would lobby hard against it. As far as safe injection sites, I agree in part with something that Charity said. I think that people need, if they have an addiction, they need counseling. They need to not feel stigmatized, but they also need someone who is going to help them get away from their addiction. And, excuse me, if we are just going to have sites where someone can just go and get a clean needle to get a fix, I'm against it. I do definitely support sites that would provide counseling, and it would be an agreement upon the person who was going to the safe injection site for needles or to get their whatever their drug of choice was, but they would need to enter into an agreement where they were going to try to start on treatment. The drug addiction problem doesn't end until we give treatment, therapy, and training. If we don't break the cycle of addiction and get people away from their addiction, all we're going to do is have more and more safe injection sites, and nobody will be moving from their addiction.
Thank you. Our next question is about a very specific situation, which you may or may not know much about, we'll see. What can the Attorney General do about the economic, social, and health injustices of locating the F-35s near lower income communities like Winooski that have voted against their basing through democratic means? Mr. Taglia.
The F-35, I believe, is a fighter aircraft that you might be talking about. My first question is the facility where the F-35s are going to be housed, is it something that's been there for a very long time? If it's been there for a very long time, I wonder if it's just a problem that for some reason the military might be the target and not the F-35 or noise. We've seen this play before where people move in next to an airport and next thing you know, they're complaining about the airport. I don't know all of the specifics of the situation you're talking about, but in the interest of national security, seeing as the F-35, I believe, is an integral part of our armed forces, I think it would be a good idea to take a good look at it before we decide that we don't want the F-35s.
That is not an area that the Attorney General has authority over. It's not something that the Attorney General would be a part of deciding or controlling.
All right, thank you. All right, this next question. Both state and federal laws have been passed requiring equity in insurance coverage of mental health care, but we do not have equity. What thoughts do you have regarding what the Attorney General's office can do about this, and what would you do if heading the office?
I'm going to talk a little bit about just mental health care generally, because I don't think that we have like a great role on that specific issue. But I mentioned when I was mentioning the 7 divisions of the office, I mentioned human services. Within the human services division of the office, we have many lawyers who service the different departments within the Agency of Human Services, mental health being one, Department of Children and Families, corrections, and so on. And that is an area where we get to provide the legal services. We don't have a lot of, independent discretion, but we are the ones who have the expertise to support the department. We do a lot of that at the Attorney General's office, and it's great work, it's important work, and the lawyers are sort of sprinkled across state government. The other area that I'll highlight, I just think is so important, is the Community Justice Division. Within the Community Justice Division, there's really 2 branches. One liaises with organizations and the legislature on some of these topics we've been talking about tonight, and the other oversees our pretrial services and court diversion program, which is a very successful program we've had for 30-something years, I think, that helps folks with lower level crimes get diverted to the treatment and the counseling and the support that they need, much lower recidivism rate, and it's really successful. We're really proud of that program, and we can learn a lot from it and from some of the restorative justice models that they have there. Mental health treatment being a common theme that we talk about when we talk about public safety. So that's why I flag it in response to that question.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tacubilla.
The mental health community in this country, not just the state, I believe for the past 50 years or more, I don't think has been serving us very well. I think one of the better ways that we could possibly improve is to, with, like Charity said, the division in the Attorney General's office, make it more available to people so that they understand what their ability to get treatment is, so that we don't have the problems. The other thing also would be to have in the criminal justice system a way to make an evaluation so that someone with a mental health issue doesn't get caught up in one side of our criminal justice system when they should be getting help for a mental illness that might keep them indefinitely out of the criminal justice system.
Thank you. All right, this next one is also another kind of specific question. Would you support a lawsuit against Monsanto Bayer demanding compensation for damages incurred from the use of their product, PCB? This would be specifically for the cost of testing and remediation of schools in Vermont and potentially health costs for those harmed by PCBs. Mr. Taglia.
I think if it could be shown that there was direct evidence it would be supported, but I think it would be very difficult to see that there was direct evidence. So I hesitate to say whether I would or not without more information and more direct knowledge of a certain situation.
You know, I've mentioned many times tonight my feelings about, you know, safety and environmentalism. I, of course, if it was justified, would feel comfortable bringing a lawsuit against the manufacturers of PCBs. And, you know, we have a situation right now that a lot of schools are being tested. And as Attorney General, will monitor closely the testing of those schools and other public buildings, and would not hesitate to take action if justified.
All right, thank you. This person asks, will you commit to releasing records related to the EB-5 scandal? And what are your views on the issues around this, one way or the other?
As Chief of Staff, I oversaw the work that we did in the Attorney General's Office of Public Records Act requests. And with regards to the EB-5 lawsuit records, it's important to just remind you that the Attorney General is the attorney to the state, and when the state is sued, the Attorney General defends the state, and that is the dynamic occurring in the EB-5 lawsuit. When, we all know this, even if we're not lawyers from the movies, but when there is an attorney-client relationship, there are documents and communications that are, quote, privileged, and because they are privileged, they are exempt from the Public Records Act, and those records have not been released because the client does not wish to release them. The attorney-client privilege belongs to the client. With regards to the EB-5 records specifically, there is a plan in place to release those records once the lawsuit is over. As Attorney General, I will stick to that plan. I think it's a good one, and look forward to one day that lawsuit being over and releasing those records.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tagovia.
I think transparency is one of the things that we must have if we're going to have the people we serve, the Vermonters we serve, trust us as people who are employed as they're parts of their government. I'm concerned that the EB-5 scandal, if the records are held until it's quote-unquote over, will the taxpayers of Vermont have any recourse? We need to know if there was public corruption. I think the Vermonters need to know, and the sooner they know, the better. I understand lawyer-client privilege, but again, the people in Vermont need to know that they can trust their public officials to do the right thing for them and with their money. Without transparency, we can't have that. And that's why I think it's very important that the information get out as soon as possible and not wait until it's over and there's no recourse for Vermonters.
All right, thank you. All right, this one's a little long. Act 41 from 2019 mandates that the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, in conjunction with the AG's office, reviews the fair and impartial policing policies of law enforcement agencies to ensure that they comply with the state's model policy. Recently, the auditor's report on the council found that out of 12 law enforcement agencies reviewed, 4 had policies that differed from the fair and impartial policing model policy. Also, several policies that were reviewed and found to be compliant were then changed afterward. Would you consider an independent community board, perhaps in conjunction with the Attorney General's office, to review these policies instead? Mr. Tagovia.
I would want to look at the policy specifically and at some of the departments that had policies that were not within the not within the guidelines. I don't know that adding a civilian board would be the right way to do it. Having maybe a board of maybe police chiefs or something like that, so that everybody, the departments could better have the standards. I don't know that I would want a civilian council or something like that, but it would depend also on the role that they would play. As I've said before, people in the community need to know and feel that their law enforcement works for them and with them. If we know who our police officers and our sheriffs are, and we interact with them, then we're going to have a better relationship with them. Right now, the relationship is soured very badly, and the best way we get over that is for our law enforcement to reach out to us, and for them, us to reach out to them. I think that's the way we get the best policing our tax dollars can get for us.
All right, thank you. Ms. Clark.
The fair and impartial policing policies, when they were put in place, they were reviewed by someone at the Attorney General's office, and the local policies needed to be as restrictive, at least as restrictive as the statewide policy. So I don't know if the four are different because they're more restrictive or not, but I wanted to flag that. I would be fine, totally open to the idea of a more collaborative review rather than just having someone in the Attorney General's office review them, but I would also be fine to have us do a re-review of them as well.
Okay, thank you. All right, Vermont has some good protections for employees against sexual harassment and other workplace discrimination, but there are still far too many people who are experiencing these barriers at work. What steps will you take to strengthen these protections and reduce the number of people who are experiencing this?
The Attorney General's Civil Rights Unit is the unit who handles those cases, and one of the changes that I proposed was to have a more robust reporting by that unit so that we can get a little bit more data and information about what the patterns are, and therefore we can analyze and decide how we can address them better. Right now, that unit does get out into the community to provide education and is a resource for the legislature regularly. I will encourage that, and to the extent that the celebrity of the Attorney General is helpful, we'll accompany them as they do their work. It's really important work, and the unit is doing a good job. They're pretty small, and I'll always make sure that they have enough resources to do the work that they do. But I do think that data collection is really important because it can just inform changes to do better.
Thank you. Mr. Taglia.
I think one of the best ways is to educate the public that the Attorney General's office actually has a unit that can handle these kinds of things and make it more accessible, if it's not very, so that anyone who has experienced sexual harassment feels like they have a place to go. I think Charity and I are in agreement on this. But I think part of it is, if I've never been a victim of sexual harassment, so I don't know, but if someone is a victim, sometimes they feel isolated. So if somehow in the workplace where some of the other postings are about employees' rights, that should be made more prominent so that employees actually know that they have an advocate in the Attorney General's office if they find that they need that.
Thank you. All right, this question is about something that's going to be on the ballot in November. Proposal 2 for amending the Vermont Constitution would prohibit any form of slavery or indentured servitude. Please describe forms of slavery or indentured servitude that still exist, in Vermont or the US that you are aware of? If this proposal passes, how will it impact the Attorney General's office, and what leadership would you provide to enforce it? Mr. Tagovia.
I don't know that I know of any type of slavery or indentured servitude. And I don't know, the only thing that comes to mind when I read that is, could indentured servitude, or could, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, I'm drawing a blank. Could indentured servitude be like what is described, like in attorneys, when they are students, they go to work for law firms, but they don't get paid? Is that something that could be described as indentured servitude? It seemed like it's a kind of a time-honored tradition where you go and you work for no pay, but you get all of the experience, for instance, at a high-powered law firm, but when you leave school, that's one of the first places you could wind up with a job. That's the only thing I could think of that could possibly be called indentured servitude. Could you repeat for me the other part of the question?
Just what impact would it have on the Attorney General's office if it passes, and would you do anything to enforce it?
Again, that would have to depend on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Clark.
I will be voting yes on this. It's something, we grew up in Vermont being told that, we were the first state to ban slavery. That's part of our lore. And to realize it's not that simple. It's disturbing. I'm glad that we're clearing it up, and I think it's easy to think, well, this is just pointless. This isn't really happening. But the truth is, there are parts in this country, there are places in this country where incarcerated individuals are not being treated in a way that I think is fair, and in many, many, many ways. And this is one of them, where they're not being compensated for work that they're doing, and it is upsetting. I think it's good here for us to be codifying in our Constitution the values that we have, and then living by them. So I'm pleased to be voting yes this November on this one.
Thank you. My next question, how will you lead the state in developing appropriate systems to track and publish data on prosecutor conduct? That is, charging decisions, diversion recommendations, bail recommendations, plea offers, and sentencing recommendations by race, ethnicity, gender, age, and indigency to identify racial, gender, and class disparities in prosecution.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I had met with internally once we got the report that recommended that we do a better job of tracking data like that, and I had met with that division and suggested we start, tracking that data. It wouldn't be a burden, and I think that they probably have already started doing that. One thing that we always want to be mindful of, not so much in this case, but I just want to say, because I was thinking about it with the civil rights case, is sometimes people have a right to privacy and don't, we have a very small state, and sometimes to say, oh, one person of this particular race, something happened, it really feels like you're violating their privacy, because everyone in that community might know who you're talking about. So I want to acknowledge that, and that would obviously be avoided. But the truth is, I'm a big believer that when you collect data, you're going to have more information to adjust policy and laws to reflect what's actually happening. And if we want to do better when it comes to racial disparities, we really want to make sure that we have that data. It's helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Tagovia.
I think it would be a good idea to track, to be sure that we're not missing anything in the law that needs to be addressed, to be corrected, to make sure that we are not adversely affecting someone because of their race. But I think also tracking that kind of data also can be helpful in actually preventing us interacting with individuals in the future. If we actually know through our data collection what we're looking at, so that we can actually make a difference and be better serving Vermonters. And I think the best thing we could do to serve people in our communities is to be blind to a lot of the data that we're collecting. Like I said before, Lady Justice is blind, and it's the good thing.
Thank you. All right. How will you use the Office of Attorney General to address poverty and wealth-based disparities in our criminal legal system? Mr. Tagliavia.
I'd have to see what exactly the question is trying to address. I don't know that the Attorney General's office is seeing wealth-based disparities. I'm not sure exactly what the question is trying to address.
Okay.
Can you reread the question?
Sure. How will you use the Office of Attorney General to address poverty and wealth-based disparities in our criminal legal system?
Within the Attorney General's office is the Community Justice Division, which I mentioned earlier, and one of the branches of that division does a lot of liaising, including with the legislature. They advocate for reforms that we feel are necessary, and they work to help educate when necessary. We have a wonderful citizen legislature, and sometimes it's helpful to have a lawyer in the room who can provide that information. So right now, the office is probably formulating their plan for January when the legislature starts. I'm really looking forward to being a part of that work to identify what areas we will be focusing on specifically when it comes to necessary reforms to the criminal justice system, and being mindful of the disparities that we know about, and one of those being income-based. One of the issues that has come up a lot is bail reform. I believe bail reform is necessary. It relies on income rather than risk, and I think it's a better way to rely on a risk-based system.
All right, thank you. So this next question is about elections, and let's see what the Attorney General, what the connection to the Attorney General's office is. Accessible and secure elections are critical for our democracy. Please outline concerns you have about elections in Vermont and what you might do as Attorney General. Ms. Clark.
We are so fortunate in Vermont to have a very accessible, open election system. To be able to go on election day and vote is wonderful. To have the clerks be able to communicate so well to each other, to work out people who are moving is wonderful. It works very, very well. As someone who, I did vote when I was in New York City, in New York City, and it was very chaotic and complicated, and how refreshing to come home, and it just works very smoothly. One of the issues that is important to me is that we maintain this system. It's not a system that the Attorney General's office runs. It's something the Secretary of State's office runs. But the Attorney General is called upon when there is something, fishy going on. And there was an example of that in recent history, and it was concluded that the person was trying to test the system to see if it worked, and it worked because he was caught. Here we are in 2022, and we'll be voting again in November. I serve as a Justice of the Peace in my town, although I couldn't do much because I'm running for office, so I'm not allowed to. But in the past, it's been really just wonderful. I'm a big believer in our system here in Vermont.
The Secretary of State, like Charity said, is responsible for the elections. In my experience attending meetings, I've found that the BCAs, the local towns, have done a good job of maintaining the elections, although I know that there are some boards of civil authority that have expressed concern because they need a little bit more help to maintain voter rolls and stuff like that. But I have found that in Vermont, people are very happy that their elections have been without any major fraud or anything like that. The Attorney General would only get involved, like Charity said, unless the Secretary of State found something that needed to be addressed. But like I said, I've found that in my asking around, people are very happy with what they have found as far as the elections.
All right, thank you. This is another question about prosecutors. What role can the Attorney General play in setting standards and consistency among prosecutors? Mr. Tagliavia.
As the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, the Attorney General can play a very big role. Like I said, I would steer the Attorney General's office toward dealing a lot more with the criminal division, but we could set the standard for how we would deal with not only criminal justice issues, but all throughout the other divisions. We would be able to set a standard for professionalism, efficiency, and resolving cases in a timely manner. I recently spoke with a couple who had an issue where they found themselves very frustrated because of the length of time an investigation wound up taking. And it's basically one of those things, the old saying is true, justice delayed is justice denied. So where we can, we need to be sure, without rushing and making mistakes, see to it that the people who find a need to have the Attorney General's office involved have their issue resolved as quickly and as timely in a manner as we can possibly make that happen.
Thank you. Clark.
I have a great deal of respect for the state's attorneys, the county prosecutors, who have we have concurrent jurisdiction at the Attorney General's office with those county prosecutors. And we try to work very well with them and would continue that. The prosecutors on the county level are part of a state, organization, the Attorney General, the state's attorneys and sheriff's organization. And we try to work closely with them as well. The Attorney General does not, however, oversee the county prosecutors. They're independently elected, 4-year terms, and we work alongside them as a colleague. And to the extent that we can be helpful, because our office is it's bigger than most of the, almost all, I think, of the state's attorney's offices. The criminal division has maybe 10 or 15 people in it in our office. And we always try to help each other out and have that colleagueship and collaborate in the legislature as well on issues. And I would want to certainly continue that collaboration and that colleagueship as Attorney General.
Thank you. All right, we have one more question and then we'll go to closing statements. And this is one that you've touched a little bit on before. It's a sort of a broad question, but perhaps you can go into some specifics. How will you hold corporations that pollute our air, soil, and water accountable? Clark.
Our environmental division it's excellent. They are very devoted and they just have a lot of smart, hardworking, and incredibly competent attorneys working there. They work really well and closely with the Agency of Natural Resources, and I'm really proud of that division. They're just wonderful, and they do great work. They also testify in the legislature really well, just so much knowledge there. Because this is, a personal value that I have, it's really important to me. Environmental issues are another marquee issue for me. I will absolutely be making sure to the full extent that I can that we are protecting Vermont's natural resources, beautiful lakes, rivers, forests. It's really important, and it's an important role that the Attorney General has. In terms of specifics, I will also note that there's a good way to use the Consumer Protection Act to protect the environment. And we have done that in a greenwashing case that we brought against the fossil fuel company. And I won't hesitate to think creatively about using all of the laws at our disposal to hold polluters to account and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect Vermont.
Thank you. Mr. Tagliavia.
In cases where it's been found or there's evidence that there are polluters, there is a pollution issue, I would by all means go to the ends of the earth to prosecute any corporation that winds up trying to get away with pollution, polluting whether it be the water, the air, or the soil. I just would be cautious to be sure that we were not being heavy-handed in the sense that we were trying to be signaling that we don't like a certain industry. If there is actual negligence or intent, then by all means I would not hesitate. But I would not be an advocate to take action against an industry, no matter what it was, to try to close an industry down because I had a personal animus or something like that against it, or make the Attorney General's office do such a thing. But pollution, we have laws that need to be applied to everyone. Everyone is equal in the eyes of the law, and corporations are going to be held accountable just like individuals would be if they run afoul of the law.
Right. Thank you. We have one more audience question, but I think we're out of time, unfortunately. Sorry. You covered such a range here. Your questions have been amazing. Thank you all. So it's time for closing statements. And Mr. Tagliavia, you have 2 minutes for a closing statement.
Like I said earlier, I'm not an attorney. I know that I would be able to lead a team in the Attorney General's office that would make Vermonters feel proud and feel happy and content that they had an advocate in the Attorney General's office that was going to do what was in the best interest of Vermont. I am a relatively new resident to this state, but I have been in a quest to find rural life and a rural lifestyle that I have found that I really enjoy in Vermont. And one of the reasons that I wanted to do this was because I believe I can be of service and be of a great service to the Vermonters, all Vermonters, no matter your economic status. I live on a gravel road on 115 acres in a log cabin. There are probably 6 camps on my road. And I enjoy this type of lifestyle, and I am going to do everything I can in my power within the law to help preserve the beautiful Vermont lifestyle.
Thank you. Ms. Clark.
This state and this country is at a pivotal moment in history. We have gun violence virtually unchecked by Congress for decades. We have climate change presenting the existential crisis of our time. Our reproductive rights are being stripped from us, and the list goes on and on. What we need right now at this moment in time is an attorney general with the experience to understand how to use the office to get the best results for Vermont, who understands the role of attorney general in serving the legislature, in serving client agencies, and in helping Vermonters. Something that didn't come up that much tonight is the Consumer Assistance Program, which I oversaw, and I usually am always talking about the Consumer Assistance Program because I believe so strongly in their work, and I usually like to drop the 1-800 number, so I'm just going to 1-800-649-2424. If you have a consumer problem, please call them. But we do so much important work at the Attorney General's office, and we need a leader who knows what the office does. I hope that tonight I have shown you all of the information, all of the knowledge and experience that I have that I can bring to bear on the office to be the next leader and to be the first woman elected Attorney General in Vermont.
Thank you both so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Sonia to close us out.
On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank you all for coming, thank the candidates for their lively response to a wide range of questions, to Kingdom Access Television, who is recording this program and streaming it live, to the St. Johnsbury Athenaeum, and our other co-sponsors, the Vermont Commission on Women, the ACLU, and the Vermont Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. And being the League of Women Voters, I want to remind you all that if you are an active voter, you should be receiving your general election ballot in the next few days. You can vote it, you can mail it back to your town clerk, you can drop it off at your town clerk's office, or you can take it to the polling place with you on election day. Make an effort, make a decision, make a difference. Every vote counts, and we know that to be the case in Vermont. So have a good night.